Okay. I don't know, welcome back. I don't know about you, but I thought the last session was particularly helpful and we were getting some really interesting views from parts of the industry that I really hadn't anticipated. But one part of the industry that we managed to overlook in the last session was the military. And now I accept that this is a meeting about the civil sector, but nevertheless, the military has, of course, significant experience of operating in the drone area. And I'm delighted to introduce Martin Radouche from the military, who's going to just give us the benefit of the military wisdom for a couple of moments. So can we have a microphone to this gentleman here, please? That's confused them. Can we have a I should have warned them. There's a microphone here if all else fails. Here, let's see you take this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since I'm the only obvious representative from the military, I'm Martin Radouche from the German Air Force. I apologize for the late entry, but it came up in the discussion in the hallway that I should say something from a military point of view, particularly trying to lift a myth that still seems to be alive, that the military seems to lock themselves away in a dark and secret vault and doesn't want to share their experience. The contrary is true. We have a lot of experience in operating the high-end UAVs, and today we heard a lot about proportionate regulation, which we can relate to. We heard a lot about the international, preferably global approach, which we can relate to, and we would like to share our experience with the civil community. In turn, we would like to be considered, we would like to be addressed, and to some extent formally invited into the conversation. And I personally believe that we have a lot of added value to contribute to both the operational and the regulatory aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Point taken. I think that is an excellent point. We're not going to discuss the military for long. Are you in the military? I know exactly what the EDI is. Sorry? Just one word. You've already had more than that. And so now we need the mic. We've got a microphone thing again. Here comes the man. We are trying to talk about some fundamental human rights, which I know doesn't work in the military, but did I get away with that? You're only allowed one word.
Yeah. Just to add that there is another voice, military voice here in the room, representing the European Defence Agency, and what I just would like to stress is that we are effectively working very much with the civil world, and particularly in terms of in the regulatory field, we are in the process of harmonizing the national process for airworthiness certification of military RPAS, and we are not doing that in isolation. What we are doing is harmonizing across the member states, but also bringing that as close as possible to the civil world has in mind in terms of regulatory framework. So I was very happy to hear that it was quite easy for high-end system, for large system to come up with a regulatory framework, because this is very much what we are looking for. So we are doing that already. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in future the military should wear uniforms so we can see them. Hiding in plain view. Are we done? Thank you. We are now moving on to the final quarter, which is the session which talks about fundamental citizens' rights, issues like that, which of course includes privacy and data protection, but I think, to be frank, is broader than that. And we've got a really remarkable panel that cuts across all of those things, and indeed two Directors General of two Directorates General, the Directorate General, or the DG Tran, sorry, I got that wrong, DG Move. We've moved, have you noticed, to third person imperative verbs. DG Move, and also the Director General of DG Grow to join us as well. We also have on the panel, we'll be spoken to by Giovanni Buttarelli, and then from the European Data Protection, he is the European Data Protection Supervisor, and Romain is also with us from the EDPS. Chris Graham, who is the Information Commissioner for the UK. As I said, Philippe Brunet from DG Grow. Jesper Rasmussen from Denmark. Thank you for joining us as well to keep our Scandinavian connections running. Baroness O'Coin, who is the chair of the EU Internal Market, Infrastructure and Employment Subcommittee in the House of Lords in the United Kingdom, Jan Simmons from ECOSOC, and then finally, to wrap it up, Mr Machado, who is the DG of DG Move. So a fascinating panel. It looks to be a very interesting topic. We're going to start with a video from Mr Buttarelli. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm very grateful for the invitation to this conference and apologize that I'm unable to attend it due to other commitments which will take me outside Europe this week. I think we may all agree that in the EU there is recognition of the potential social and economic benefits that can be derived from the commercial use of drones. This is why, alongside industry's efforts in deploying this technology, the EU has put forward plans for its introduction on the EU market and to remove barriers in the EU single market. In November last year, the European Data Protection Supervisor responded to the Commission's April communication on this technology and to research projects under the framework Project 7 framework. We publish our opinion on the EDPS website and we are actively contributing to the Article 29 Working Party's position on this important area. I believe that irrespective of the various regulatory issues at stake, we need better understanding of why, since their infancy, new drone technologies have significant implications for privacy and data protection. These aircraft systems are often combined with data processing tools such as cameras, microphones, sensors, GPS, which allow the collection and further processing of personal data concerning identified or identifiable individuals. A few countries also protect information relating to legal persons. Drones are mobile devices, almost unnoticeable, and it is hard to identify who is using them. So, transparency and accountability are paramount concerns. The trouble is that the current legal framework at EU and national level, specific rules, procedures and best practices are inconsistent, fragmented, obsolete, or too general for industry to understand what needs to be done in practical terms. In Europe, a number of general rules on privacy and data protection are already applicable to the processing carried out via drones, as for example, the Council of Europe Convention 108, the Directive 95/46, Regulation 45/2001, and also the European Court of Justice case law. I encourage a more detailed understanding of the technology, informed by an honest and open dialogue between legislators, practitioners, stakeholders, manufacturers, regulatory and data protection authorities. On that basis, we need to build a comprehensive regulatory framework that enshrines personal data protection as a core element. The civil use of drones needs to be better addressed at EU and national level on the basis of best practices and, where necessary, new harmonized rules which are compatible with Europe's new data protection rules currently being negotiated. So clearly, the civil aviation authorities need to consider the impact on the fundamental rights of individuals when allocating permits. We do not need necessarily to amend European national data protection framework to accommodate drone technologies. However, there may well be benefiting guidelines and recommendations by data protection authorities cooperating on this issue. These authorities may also play an important role in supporting designers, developers and industry to correctly address those challenges and better embed the principles of privacy by design and privacy by default. In our 2014 opinion, I have mentioned it, we highlighted that the EU should play a leading role in raising awareness of manufacturers, users and data subjects on the existing data protection framework, regardless of the size of the RPAS. At the design phase, manufacturers should implement privacy by design and privacy by default. there is a need to increase transparency towards data subjects and facilitate the identification of the controllers. Data protection impact assessment should be carried out where processing operations present specific risks to the rights and freedoms of the data subjects. And finally, there is also room for raising consumers' awareness on their private use of drones. We are closely following the implementation of the Commission's communication and will continue to monitor and advise on future regulatory developments at EU level in that field. In the joint statement of the European Data Protection Authorities assembled made at the European Data Protection Governance Forum in Paris on 8 December last year, the 29 Working Party affirmed that the data processing through drones by governmental services must be for the purposes laid down in the relevant legislation and should not be used for unlawful cigarette surveillance, bulk data processing, unlawful data pooling and profiling. The Working Party will soon follow up on this statement with further details, and I'm confident that today's panel will build on the very fruitful conference I have attended a few weeks ago in Budapest in identifying big issues and risks and point towards solutions and best practices. So my best wishes to you for a successful event, and I look forward to continuing the discussions.
Sadly lacking a sight gag at the end there. To continue on the topic of privacy and data protection and so forth, the first of a number of topics I think we need to canvass, I'd like to ask Chris Graham if he'd carry on. Thanks very much.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for including me in your discussions. I'm the United Kingdom Information Commissioner, and I'm afraid I stand before you after standing out in that cold aerodrome, watching the devices flying around as l'anglais avec son sang-froid habituel, the Englishman with his usual bloody cold. So if I start sneezing, please forgive me. We've just had a very effective presentation from Giovanni Buttarelli, the European Data Protection Supervisor, and part of the privacy team here today is Giovanni's colleague Romain from the EDPS, and I'm supported by the Latvian Data Protection Commissioner, Signe Plumina, because I think you need to understand the structure for regulating data protection and privacy across the European Union. Giovanni is responsible, and his team is responsible for making sure that the institutions of the European Union protect and observe and respect the fundamental right of data protection in their activities, but also provides thought leadership on the subject and is a very active member of the Article 29 Working Party, as I am, as is Signe, because that is the family of the data protection authorities from all the 28 member states. And we are, on the Article 29 Working Party, engaging with these issues and working on our response to the Commission communication and for developments in the industry with an opinion from the Working Party, which I think will be finalised in the summer, in June, which is going to be an important part of the debate. Now, apart from acquiring a cold in a cold airfield, I was fascinated by the kit we saw yesterday and the potential for what these RPAS or drones or UFOs or whatever they are can do. And it makes manifest sense. And being a strong believer that those of us in the data protection business should be as interested in the possibilities as the prohibitions, one can see that if we get the regulation right, all sorts of good things are going to happen. Sometimes it's quite scary when you're confronted by the technological possibilities. Where I'm based in the northwest of England, we have a biggest production establishment of the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. And I went to look at their future lab the other day at Media City in Salford Quays, and they showed me a drone camera of the sort we saw making the James Bond movie yesterday. But this had been used to make a documentary about Canterbury Cathedral. And the drone had been flying around within the choir of Canterbury Cathedral next to priceless 13th century stained glass. And I thought, boy, if one of these things goes wrong and you take out a few priceless stained glass windows, that's going to be very serious. But I said, no, this is all fine. And here's the documentary we made from that, and very powerful it was. Now, we've been talking really about what the kit is, but less about what it does. And what it is, I would say, for the most part, is a CCTV system in the sky. And it's not surprising to say that the rules that apply to closed-circuit television will also apply to drones, because you're dealing with personal information. And personal information has been regulated within the European Union, the European community, over 20 years, since the 1995 directive on the protection of personal information. And the protection of personal information is recognized as a fundamental right within the treaty of the European Union. So we need to focus in this session on the applications of the technology, although the other sessions we've had and the concerns about safety of the equipment and other equipment that may come into contact with it, obviously very, very important. The minute I saw those birds flapping around in the field yesterday, I thought, what about a bird strike? That sort of bird is not just going to be turned into soup if it hits an aero engine, but that's your business, not my business. But I'm interested in applying the principles of data protection to this technology. And perhaps it's not well enough understood, and all you people working in this area will need to bone up on this, that personal information is protected by law, by a directive which is transposed into national legislation across 28 member states of the European Union. We may be able to get greater consistency when the legislator manages to pass the regulation, which is going to provide more uniformity around this. But basically, the principles, the 8 principles that underline data protection need to be observed. Processing of personal information has got to be lawful. It's got to be for a clear and defined purpose, not excessive, adequate for the purpose, but no more than that. It's got to be accurate. You've got to be able to establish that if there are inaccuracies, they will be got rid of. It's got not to be retained for longer than is necessary for the original purpose. It's got to be processed in line with the rights of the data subject. And you'll have heard about subject access requests of data controllers and so on. It must be kept secure. Now, if you're going to go around hoovering up all sorts of personal information, either deliberately or just as a byproduct, operators of these systems have got to think in terms of making sure that they comply with the European law. And that also includes transferring information outside the European Economic Area. Now, what I was struck by yesterday in the industry pitch was the emphasis is all on jobs and growth, and fantastic. I'm all in favour of that. But where's the sense of corporate social responsibility? The question I asked yesterday was, the only reference we had to this was from somebody who said this is all about freedom and free as a bird and so on. Well, that's fine, but you're not going to win the argument to leave us alone to get on with our wonderful technology, which is going to create jobs and growth, unless you can deal with the privacy question, because you're going to need to win the confidence of citizens and consumers to make this proposition work. Now, that's why my authority, the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK, has been very much engaged in this subject, both in terms of responding to the communication from the Commission, engaging with the trilateral research which was commissioned. We're engaged with the Civil Aviation Authority in the UK. We're involved in the cross-government working group. And it's important that we should be. But it's also important, I think, that we make clear to citizens and consumers and to operators in this space of what the law actually says. Because there is a domestic exemption from data protection law, but be careful that you don't draw that too widely. Because case law from the Court of Justice of the European Union has established very clearly that you can't just go around saying, well, this is just for my domestic use, if you're involving other people. We've got the Lindqvist judgment, which established that years ago, and very recently we've got the Reines judgment, which was specifically about closed-circuit television. Closed-circuit television trained on my house, fine, but if it's also capturing the public space and the neighbour's garden and so on, then the personal information, the images, what's going on that's captured by that CCTV camera is subject to data protection law. So the task we've all got, and I suggest we're all in this together, to build the confidence, to make sure that the word drone doesn't strike fear into everybody's heart, is that we emphasize the need to think through the privacy implications from the outset. It's what we call privacy by design, privacy by default almost with some of the kit. We need to have privacy impact assessments, like a risk assessment. What are the privacy implications of what this is doing? Data protection impact assessments. And I think I would suggest to you that your industry needs to demonstrate social responsibility. Unless you do that, the message about jobs and growth is going to be cancelled out by a sort of public fear. What's going on here? I don't like this. The spy in the sky. And that's going to be very difficult for politicians to resist. So it's in everybody's interest to think through the privacy implications. This is not just the equivalent of a selfie stick up in the sky. Even if you're sad enough to have one of these things following around your quad bike, the chances are that it's going to be capturing other things that are going on. If it's a nice high-level aerial shot showing how you're competing with this person and that person, they're all in the picture together. There are data protection implications here. So my final point really would be, let's get the industry thinking about this and at least get some advice to consumers and citizens. The ICO recently published an updated version of our CCTV code and specifically included advice on unmanned aerial systems as part of that CCTV code. Can we also say to the manufacturers, will you please start putting some advice in the box about legal responsibilities, about common sense, about don't be evil? I was very encouraged in the presentation we had from the French Civil Aviation Safety Directorate about the 10 Commandments, and I liked Commandments 8 and 9 about don't invade private space. Be careful how you dispose and deal with the information that you harvest. As we come to the reform of data protection regulation across the European Union, and the regulation as opposed to a directive which is transposed slightly differently in every member state, regulation applies uniformly. The regulation is going to be sorted out politically this year, will be coming into force in 2017, and undoubtedly affects your business. So let's all pull together on this one and make sure there's lots of advice for consumers and that manufacturers and the developers of apps and so on understand this is not an add-on. This is not a sort of yeah, and all this privacy stuff. We don't really care about that. It's absolutely fundamental. Drones are in the privacy business. You need to be in the privacy reassurance business. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Our next speaker is Baroness Detta Okerhoin, and she is, as I said before, the chair of the House of Lords committee that addresses some of these issues, and they have just released a report, hot off the press, which you have on your chairs, and you will have just seen, absolutely, literally hot off the press this morning. Baroness Okerhoin.
was a happy coincidence that we arranged to publish our report 1 minute past midnight yesterday, and I was coming here to talk about not necessarily the report, but the whole issue, which we have been looking at for many months. I am chairman, as I say, of this House of Lords committee, and the way we take evidence, we decided in April 2014, well, after April 2014, when the Commission published a report on a communication about plans to make the EU a leader in the RPAS industry. I'm going to refer to them all the time as RPAS, not drones, because it's this interchangeability. Oh, sorry about that. It's confusing the issue, I think, in a lot of ways. We decided to conduct this inquiry in response to this particular communication, and we're seeing it as part of, again, the jobs and growth agenda. And while the inquiry was discussed the issues related, and I've also got this cold from looking at those wonderful birds out in the field. I apologize for that. In issues related to data protection and societal concerns more generally, it also considered whether there was a role for EASA to harmonize safety rules across Europe and create an internal market in RPAS, and what those rules should be like. Whether indeed R&D strategy outlined by the communication would meet the needs of the industry. What actions could be taken to address public concerns about private or leisure RPAS users who know little, if anything, about aviation regulations. Like other contributors to this conference, our committee heard that there's a huge potential for growth and jobs in this emerging sector. Businesses across Europe are using small RPAS for photography, filming, surveying, and we did see a lot of that yesterday. They can also be used to carry out dull and dirty and dangerous jobs, such as cargo shipping and search and rescue, and indeed crash investigation, as we saw when we took the committee to Cranfield University, where they're way ahead in some of the drone technology. It was very interesting because that visit happened shortly after, or around the time that the airplane was blown out of the sky over eastern Ukraine. And of course, the people involved were not allowed, well, not the people involved, the general public were not allowed to go near the crash scene for a very long time, which was pretty awful, actually, in ways. And if we'd had drones, RPAS at that stage, they would have been able to photograph every square inch or square meter of the ground and come to some conclusions, because indeed the evidence apparently had been somewhat tampered with. So evidence given to the inquiry agreed with the Commission's estimate that around 150,000 new jobs could be created across Europe from RPAS activity by the year 2050. But it noted that for this potential to be realized, the safety of the RPAS operations will have to be demonstrated and gain public approval. Our report found that stifling the industry through over-regulation, of course, should be avoided because safety rules are proportionate to risk. Many of the civilian applications for RPAS explore the ability to collect useful data in a more affordable and frequent basis. Therefore, attention as to how existing data protection legislation may apply to RPAS is understandable and to be expected. However, we found that while RPAS present a unique way to capture data, similar concerns are also present with other forms of ubiquitous technology, such as cameras or mobile telephones or Google Earth. Moreover, the evidence noted that the advantage of existing data protection legislation is that it is technology neutral. This has enabled the legislation to be flexible enough to adapt to advances in technology. The Information Commission has already mentioned closed-circuit television, and we were told by his office, when they were witnesses, that the Data Protection Directive in the UK was adapted to the widespread introduction of CCTV. And we actually looked at CCTV many years ago, and there was uproar in Britain saying that there were too many cameras everywhere. But came some of these terrorist attacks, and nobody now says there are too many CCTV cameras. We are managing to live with it and just say, well, those who worry about it must have something to worry about. Moreover, the evidence noted, we also learnt, instead of changing the law, we decided to recommend that data protection agencies create share clear guidance about what data protection obligations apply to commercial RPAS operators. We acknowledge the good work that's been done in the UK, and the ICO recently included reference to the use of RPAS, as we have heard, for capturing data in its CCTV code practice. In addition, clear guidance will help to ensure that the law is applied consistently and give operators a degree of certainty. The Data Protection Directive is in the process of being updated through the General Data Protection Regulation. This presents an opportunity to consider how changes could apply to RPAS use and strengthen data protection rights. An important change will be the introduction of privacy impact assessments. It was argued that these assessments would prevent breaches of data protection rules by forcing operators to consider the risks of their operations before they begin. Now, the Information Commissioner's Office noted that if these assessments serve to prevent breaches of data protection legislation, it would also reduce the burden on their resources. So it was a win-win situation. Much of the evidence supported their introduction, although it was unclear how often commercial operators would be required to complete assessments. And one witness feared that the assessments and completion thereof would add to its burden to the burden of businesses and become merely a tick-boxing exercise. While our report doesn't recommend a change in the data protection legislation, it does urge EU action to address other legitimate concerns about RPAS. Rights Watch UK told us that members of the public would find it difficult to exercise their data protection rights if they did not know who was operating a drone or why, or an RPAS or why. Trilateral Research and Consultancy Limited, in their report to the Commission, also noted that there remained a problem with enforcing the existing laws. Over the course of our inquiry, we found that identifying RPAS operators and enforcing existing rules was a problem, not just for the data protection, but also for safety in general. While not discussed in the Commission's communication, the evidence we received suggested that something needed to be done about this, particularly in relation to private or leisure uses. This was because these users typically have no knowledge of aviation regulations and are not required to liaise with civil aviation authorities. In the absence of a global system which could track all RPAS, including small RPAS flying below 500 feet, we were impressed by the industry suggestions for the creation of an ongoing database through which commercial operators could log their flight plans and data. Now, to elaborate on that, there are some points that we've made about this database. It would be an app, which would be an opportunity initially for commercial operators to register the location, duration, and purpose of their operations online for the public. In the long term, this system would include RPAS used by private individuals, probably via inbuilt chips, allowing automatic tracking without user having to input anything. So what's the point of this suggestion? The awareness of who was flying and for what purpose would help police enforce existing laws so they would know what the operator is, who the operator is. For example, Paris recently. It would help to improve the safety of operations in one area, as operators would be aware of other RPAS users operating nearby. It will also increase the transparency of the operations, so members of the public would be more aware. Commercial operators would have the reassurance that enforcement agencies and the public know that they are permitted to fly and so that it could encourage more applications and more business growth. Well, whose idea was it? We were told by a variety of witnesses that the benefits of this sort of database with multiple sources suggested this. Belgian Trade Association recommended the creation of a database to log flight plans and gain permission to operate. Flirty, an RPAS delivery business in Australia, requested that a symbolist system be created to allow operators to request permission to fly quickly. Jay Bregman, the entrepreneur behind the eCourier and Halo, is working to develop such a system. A research consultancy made similar recommendations to the European Commission to help the public identify RPAS in the sky and enforce their data protection rights. And even British Model Flying Association and the Association of the Association of RPAS noted that a chip with the details of the owner could be used. And how would it work? It would work on smaller RPAS only operators would input the location, time, and intended use. Users who log in could see that there is a registered user in their area, but not necessarily access real-time flight plan data. We don't envisage that such a system would necessarily separate aircraft in the same way, characteristic of the aviation air traffic management. But for commercial use aircraft, and that have the sense and avoid technology. Difficult operations, sorry, I've messed up my pages. And I would like to finish by saying that, with a question really to the audience, what about an application to the recently announced very large increase in research and innovation in the EU budget to develop the wish list of technology that must occur to ensure that RPAS become a major contributor to the jobs and growth of the EU, not least the export potential? Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just say that that's the report? What you've got there are just the recommendations.
I do beg your pardon.
But there's a website on it, and if you want to get the report, you can.
Thank you very much. I stand corrected. We slightly dropped out of batting order there for a moment. I don't quite know why I did that, but never mind. Thank you very much, Baroness O'Coin. Our next speaker is the DG of DG Grow, the Director General of the Directorate General Grow, Mr. Philippe Brunet. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the onset and following the two previous presentation, I would like to say that from an industrial policy standpoint, we strongly believe in DG Grow that public perception and the challenges that emerging technology of drone faces in terms of protection of citizens' fundamental rights, in particular privacy and data protection, are indeed one of the keys to unlock the potential of this market. And for that's why DG Grow has been entering this field. When we started our work on drones back in 2009, we were convinced that the development of the drones market needs to go hand in hand with tackling societal issues. New applications and services would develop only if they were acceptable for the public opinion. Recent reports in the press on illegal and intrusive operations by RPAS confirm today that our assessment was the right one. And we noticed that other regions in the world that try to avoid dealing with the issue like privacy and data protection jeopardized their rulemaking process. So, what did we do so far? As from 2013, we engage in a dialogue with the European data protection authorities at both the EU and national level. As a result of this process, the European Data Protection Supervisors issued an opinion on drones in November 2014. In parallel, we started the dialogue with national data protection authorities gathered, and that has been mentioned already, in the so-called Working Group 29. This group is finalizing now its opinion, even though I've heard that some last-minute issue may delay the actual release of this opinion. Indeed, this opinion insists on important measures like raising awareness and developing tools to support the industry. At the same time, we commissioned a study on data protection and privacy, conclusions of which were made public last October. So what have we found? First, there seems to be a consensus that the European legislation on data protection, once the ongoing revision is finalized, does not need to be modified since it is technologically neutral. In other words, it does not need to be specifically adapted to the requirement of drones technologies. However, this new regulation introduces concepts that are very relevant for drones, such as data protection, impact assessments, and privacy by design. Beyond legislation, soft law instruments would be very useful in educating the RPAS industry about their obligations and in enforcing the regulatory mechanisms once they are in place. For instance, the use of templates for privacy and data protection impact assessments can help operators evaluate the impact of their operations on data protection and privacy, along with possible mitigation measures. The implementation of privacy by design may also be accompanied by some standardization. If a drone is monitoring infrastructure, the operator might be required to use a process that allows blurring faces of persons around in its vicinity. If so, it would make sense to standardize this requirement. Second aspect of our study, privacy issues, is equally important. A drone can fly at a very low altitude over somebody's property without registering any personal data. Nevertheless, this might give the owner of the property the feeling of a very intrusive operation. To understand better what is at stake for the public in terms of privacy, the Joint Research Centre, which is another service of the European Commission, conducted some research in 2014. It is interesting to note that this research revealed very different reaction to operation of drones due to the different cultures of privacy in the member states. From a legal standpoint, privacy issues are mainly of national competence, and these cultural differences underpin such an approach. But there are efficient tools to be developed for data protection or other purposes like insurance or liability that could be helpful for privacy as well. For example, both our study and the data protection supervisor's opinions show that the ability to identify drones operations may be very helpful for public acceptance. This is where we are today. Question, what's next? From now on, we will concentrate on the implementation of the action based on study findings and on the recommendations of the data protection authorities where they will be finalized. As we are primarily responsible for industry in the EU Commission, this involvement in societal issues, I repeat, is mainly driven by the need to support the development of the market. This involvement should also be seen in a broader context the context of the three sets of rules needed to fly drone. First, rules of the air. This is what discussed in depth in the previous session in the regulatory framework. Second, rules on insurance and liability. This will be based on the European Union regulation adopted in 2004, which applies to drone. And finally, the subject of our panel, rules on societal aspects like privacy and data protection. In this rather complex environment, raising awareness of the industry on the different set of rules is our priority number one. We have decided to allocate a dedicated budget of €1 million to launch an awareness action for the drone sector. This will be based on an open access through a web portal to rules applicable to the operation of drones. Pedagogic tools, tutorial, and e-learnings would also be available. This would be made available to all kinds of companies in order to simplify the start and the running of their drone-related businesses. The call of proposal is now finalized, and our executive agency in charge of SMEs, EASME, will grant the contract later this year. But beyond this awareness action, there is more we can do. As I already mentioned, the ability to identify drones operating over people's heads could be critical in improving public perception. There are some interesting technologies in this area, like microchips, GSM, or radio frequency identification device, just to give you some example. The Joint Research Center may evaluate the potential of these existing technologies in their implementation in drones. Some requirements in this regard could be introduced in the future regulatory framework. We also reflect on the best ways to support the development of templates for data protection and privacy impact assessments, and on improving public perception of drones. As with any new market, there are for our drones market some critical success factors. This is why I will end my intervention by making two operational pleas. First plea is to the civil aviation regulators and data protection authorities. For us, it's essential that a continuous dialogue take place between them, an interactive dialogue on data protection and privacy issues, and that when they will be defining and implementing regulations. This will allow the development of a responsible market. My second plea will be to the industry. The involvement of industry will be needed on data protection and privacy issues. In the electricity sector, the development of smart grids raised serious issues of privacy and data protection. The industry responded by getting involved in defining methodologies for privacy and data protection impact assessment. And at the end, the European Commission supported this work and the findings. Solutions were adopted and the problem fixed. We need to do the same in the current sector. We need the same kind of involvement of the drones industry, and we are prepared from the point of view of the Commission to accompany the process as we do in the example I give you on smart grids. I will conclude by that, and I will be happy to answer your question later on. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We now move back to a view perhaps more focused on a national perspective, and I'd like to ask Jesper Rasmussen, who is the DGCA of Denmark, if he would talk to us. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. First slide, please. Yes, we move. First slide. Yes. Next slide, please. You see it? Okay. There we go. Thank you. Well, just a short comment in the beginning on the name of the baby. Well, who will win? We will bet on the horse to the left, but in the aviation community, we like to speak in acronyms, but I will speak on drones the rest of my presentation. Today we have a national regulation set more or less like we heard from Sweden earlier. But in the last 1.5 years, we have sat down with colleagues from police, intelligence, defense intelligence, frequency administration, export control, and other actors to see how should we holistically regulate small drones in the future. And we have, in previous presentations, touched upon the three major concerns: safety, privacy, including data protection, and also security issues. The report on our work will be published shortly on our website. I have with me a very short paper which can be handed out to if you're interested. So, what kind of regulation regime do we want? We have in many presentations talked about risk-based, and risk here is both safety risks, privacy risks, and security risks. And what does it mostly resemble, these small drones below 25 kilos? Is it more in aviation, to the right, very few actors, and with a risk of a catastrophe? Or is it to the left, individual accidents, can be killed, yes, and very many actors? Well, we think we will go to the left. The second principle for a regulation regime should be very clear and simple, kind of road sign logic. Road sign logic is, as we know it from the streets, very simple. It's not always completely fair. It's a bit squared, but it's easy to understand. So there are two sides of the coin. Traditional aviation regulation is more fair, but it's quite complicated. So it should be very simple, especially when we are addressing the hobby users, the recreational users of drones. So, like on the European level, we have gone through the national regulation on privacy and security. The regulation is largely okay, in place, also covering drones. So, no big need for changes here. We keep the principle of no urban flying. We're not ready to that, and the technology or the equipment of the drones are not ready for that. We want to have a drone permit, and you should think it like a fishing permit, very, very simple, where you should tick some boxes in a multiple choice test, and write your insurance number before you can put on the print bottom and get your permit out. Because that will be a way also to enhance the insurance, the third-party liability, which is quite obvious for us, which that is needed. Further, we would like to put in consumer packages some information on drones. Our national legislation opens for that. It would be even better it was on European level, of course, because there are many channels in. Like we have in with a number of other products where it says be aware that you should handle your product in this way. And then we see a need for EU product standardization. We're talking about consumer products here. We touched upon standardization issues in the previous session. It's quite clear that there is a big need here, and there's a lot of things already going on. And the first thing I think for the Commission is to actually do some mapping of what is going on on a European level, on a global level here. We also set a threshold for drones where there is no safety issues. And back to what Patrick Key mentioned earlier in the three groups. The lower group, we don't want to regulate for safety purposes. There might be some privacy and security challenges coming up, and we will look further on that. We have based the 250 grams on some scientific study, and I have a preprint of that if you want it. Let me just share with you what kind of challenge we have in terms of enforcement. Please start. There's a sound also.
A plane? Nope. It's the world's smallest spy camp. And today, near Oslo, Norway, this team is taking it farther and faster than it's ever gone before.
Something we have tested many times, but not from that far out and that high.
Paul is the drone's target. He's going to hide about 1 kilometer away at the top of a small cliff, leaving time for the rest of the team to give the Hornet drone, officially called the PD-100, the once-over.
Check the system, see that GPS, everything is up and running.
Each one weighs only 16 grams. That's the same as 3 sheets of paper.
Within the base station, we have not 1, but 2 self-contained helicopters which are ready to fly out of the box. Once we're ready to fly and we have the helicopter out, I can hold this here and put the pocket-sized base station in my back pocket. It's ready to go when you're ready. Now I'm just heading out now.
Get quick.
So this just illustrates there's obviously not much safety in such a drone here, but it can certainly take a lot of pictures. So that is one of the key challenges we have. Please go to the next slide. You have to escape. Thank you. On professional drones, back to the picture I presented before, well, we will look basically at the regulation of cars. I mean, that's a picture which we all know. It's a regulation regime which is clear, quite simple, and not too heavy. We'll talk about number plates, or rather electronic identification. I'll come back to that. We'll talk about some traffic or airspace information, traffic regulation, operative rules, where to fly. There's some frequency that's beyond cars, of course. That's a special drone thing. There's liability insurance, and that's drone licenses for various weight categories. Just a comment on keeping weight categories as a good or bad thing. Well, I think it's not a question of either or, it's a question of both. Because if we have to communicate in a simple way, it's easy to follow the weight categories. But together with the Danish drone industry, we talked about that if you can prove that you are safe going beyond a certain weight limit, that's also okay. But then it's your task to make the proof. So we don't say either weight or purely risk-based, it's both. Let me just elaborate a bit on two of the initiatives we are going to pursue, which touch upon security and privacy matters. Well, first about the number plates. Well, the key thing to ensure compliance and enforcement, that is for the drones to be visible, not only visible in traditional way, but also in electronically. That's also a way, if the drone can be identified wherever it is, then the risk of the drone taking pictures we don't want is less, because we can enforce the regulation. We can come after them. So they need number plates, electronically, of course. Today, working closely with the police, it's quite clear that the police cannot arrest a drone like they can arrest a car. So we have, together with the Danish drone industry, set up a test program where the 3 technologies are tested, well, these weeks, in fact. And the 3 candidates are the SIM card, which we all know, and the RFID tags, which we also know for entry cards and so on. And then the DECT technology, perhaps less known, but it's the technology we use in hand-free phones and so. They're all fairly cheap technologies existing on the market. And the candidate is probably the DECT technology as it stands right now. It can change because it has a distance of a couple of kilometers. And that means that you can actually use it both for enforcement purposes by the police, but also that in terms of safety, that in the future other airplanes or other drones can actually register where and who the drone is. We will get results in May, and we will be very happy to share it with you. And of course, our goal would be that there would be some kind of EU standard on this matter. The other issue, which is important for privacy and security, that's airspace restrictions. And there are some fixed restrictions. You can never fly over prisons or government buildings and so on. But there's also some temporary restrictions due to VIP visits or accidents and fires and so on. And the police needs to communicate the day-to-day restrictions easily, so it can be grasped by the drone operators. And I've learned earlier at this conference that perhaps we can continue with some solutions of some design where you can actually have no-fly built in the drones. But my point here is that you need the day-to-day information in an easy way, so the drone operators are updated where you can fly today and where you cannot fly. We have found out, together with our air navigation service provider, that the existing NOTAM system actually can be used, but the presentation and the whole way the data is structured is not in place for drone users yet. Ideally, we should reach a situation where we have a picture like this. You have a no-fly zone established this morning because of a fire or a security incident. And then you have some drones flying around, and it's quite easy on your iPad or your phone to see where you can fly and where you cannot fly. So that was the main issues in our work the last 18 months across various ministries, which is touching upon these very important issues of privacy and security. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Jan Simmons, who's from the European Social, I always get this wrong, Economic and Social Committee, I beg your pardon. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for it. I will tell you only old stuff. But it's always good to repeat it again and again. First of all, starting with his wording, the European Economic and Social Committee is not well known, and I'm happy for it because we are advising the Commission, the Parliament and the Council of the European Union, stated by the Treaty of Rome. And therefore, it is good that we are not so in the public, because then with the 341 members, you have always members who say something else they have voted. And therefore, also me, here standing as a representative of, I'm of the employers group, but we have also employees, and there is a third part of that members are of different organizations, NGOs, environmental society, free works, agriculture is also in it. So you see the whole societal organizations are represented. And we made, as asked by the Commission after their communication in the beginning of 2014, we made our opinion. I was a rapporteur of a working group, and in October it was voted in the general meeting of the committee and sent it to the Commission. They will respond official after a quarter of a year. But the development is going faster and faster. And therefore, I start by the 8 points, the main points I detect from the opinion for you. But I think it will be better to react than on the questions you put on the table these days also. Well, the first conclusion of our opinion was that it's a challenge. The word challenge we have seen already on the screens here also, but it's possible that the drone industry can develop more also the employment, but also the knowledge for technology and development. And here said that the existing European SME funding will further stimulate the development of the RPAS industry. And I'm happy to hear from the Director General that he goes further with it, and because also by us, the SMEs are of the first priority. Then the second point by us was the discussion about drones. Denmark is talking about drones, but we suggest from the legal point, and to avoid misunderstanding, especially by the liability and the insurance, to follow the international wording of the ICAO. Don't introduce in Europe other things. When we are talking legally, talk about RPAS and nothing else. In journals, when you are discussing with the people, when you make articles in general, then you can use the word drone. But don't forget that, in fact, the word drone is a military expression. And it's really confusing when you make something others. It's, remember me the discussion we had this morning about the RPAS. Is that an aircraft or not? And I remember my university time as a student that there was in the beginning of the 60s discussion. No, I must say the example of Mr. Schade, Professor Schade, who teach the sea law, about the hovercraft. It was in that time a discussion point. And also, when I look to that, for me, RPAS, the little bees to the big ones flying on the sheet of the director of the European Commission higher than the airplanes, all that RPAS or drones, when you want, are surely aircraft, because the most important thing is, in any case, to fly. And that means that the basic rules of aircraft has to be implemented too. But then only the basic, because it's true that machine is, of course, a special kind of aircraft. As you have other modes of transport, also special kinds of machines with different rules. Like also between the modes of transport there are different rules. So you have inside and outside also you can make a difference. But the basic is aircraft. Then the third point we have is by us, you can imagine that there are people from, special also from NGOs, but also from industry, are applying for recognition and identification of each aircraft. Also by us in the discussion by the recreation tools, there must be the possibility to identify the aircraft. And of course, when we are talking about the commercial applications, then it's for sure. The fourth point is that by the commercial exploitation will require further adjustments. But we have discussed already about more limitations for the third-party liability, the introduction of lower weights categories, of course, and the risk level association with the flight characteristics of the very small RPASs. Then the fifth point, there we are talking about the existence of harmonized rules. I think that, and also for Tugger standards. And we have advised to the Commission in any case to go in that way, because when we learned in the Netherlands, where we were on a hearing there, that you have in the commercial world, that they're going to the frontier of Germany, going there up in the air, and then making the business in the Netherlands. That's not good when it is in that way. So let's have an equal level playing field in Europe, and you can only make that by harmonization of the different rules. And we asked the Commission for a proactive role. And well, you see, they are already started with it, and they will continue. Then I have point 6. You will find the opinion on the on your internet, in any case by www. And then our abbreviation is not ECOSOC, but is EESC, European Economic and Social Committee, EESC, then .europe.eu. So then you go to opinions, then you put my name in it and the year 2014, and you have the opinion. You can also put in, of course, remotely piloted aircraft systems that will react too. And then you can see more our analysis, the part of the analysis of the opinion, because the time is too short to explain it here. I was very lucky, and I can be short about it, because just from the military side there were 2 remarks, in any case, about military affairs. Also, we made it to coordinate civil and military developments in this area, providing from synergies where possible. And then the last point, Mr. Moderator, is that as far as is possible, we must have a picture of the RPAS air traffic in connection with all aircraft in circulation, but that's always already also explained by my precedent speakers. Well, there are in short, the 8 major points, and because it is obligatory in the Treaty of the European Union that the European Economic and Social Committee is asked for advice always when there are law propositions, I'm sure I will find myself back in this subject, what's really new, and I'm happy to develop with you this kind of living in this world. Thank you.
Thank you, and I solemnly promise never to get the name wrong again. Our final speaker this morning is the Director General of DG Move, Juan Aguirre Machado, and I'd like to ask him to speak to us, and then we'll have a quick conversation. Thank you.
Well, on this question of on the panel subject matter, I think there has been already a number of points, or indeed a lot of points that have already been made by the other members of the panel. I just wanted from my side to make a couple of observations to try to complete the picture. I think the previous speakers have already spoken about the importance of privacy security. And I have to say that I cannot agree more than the importance that it has, that all this question of the societal acceptance of drones is crucial. If people don't trust drones, governments and parliament will not let them fly. And I think this question needs to be taken very seriously. We have seen that already in other technologies what can happen if there is public resistance. And I think this needs to be taken seriously in the case of drones. There is responsibility both from the regulators and the industry, and both need to give reassurance to the public and to promote and to improve the acceptance by the public. I would like, and I will try to make a link between the 2 panels of today on safety and this one on societal issues. And here you have projected a slide which all the linkages that are made between the different issues. We have heard that there is a clear need for new safety rules to open the European drone market. However, and I think this has already been said by my predecessors here this morning, on the basis of the current assessment that we have, we don't see the need to have new rules, at least at this stage, in the other areas, and the other areas are data protection, privacy, liability, security, or even the environment. We believe that certainly these are clear problems that need to be dealt, but the regulatory machine and instruments that are already in existence, we believe they are able to deal with questions that arise with drones. Certainly, we may need to have some guidelines, some ways of making it clear how this application of these rules can be adapted to the case of drones. But, and this was mentioned, I think, by Philippe Brunet before me this morning, but we don't see the need to come with the new regulations to address this issue. But let me start with the issue of privacy. And this, again, is also one of the important points already made this morning. Safety rules require that the drone should always be identifiable. Well, privacy rules also, privacy requires that the citizen is entitled to know who is flying a drone when it is intruding in his private space. So I think that here safety and privacy needs could be met by a single solution, and that Jesper mentioned this morning already before me is the question of number plates for drones. If you have identification, so you can easily track and see where is the drone. Indeed, I would propose before a very famous enterprise comes with it, that we call these, instead of number plates, iDrones. We could probably develop something there. It has not yet been used. So, so there are other options, certainly. There are other options. But in all cases, what we need to make sure is that the registration is simple, that we don't come with a complicated process to register the drones. To complete the comments that my colleagues already made on security, safety certification rules could also cover, in our view, security aspects. For instance, an implementing rule on the quality and non-interference of the command and control links of drones with the ground station and between air traffic control is required for both safety and security imperatives. For your information, and I indicated that already yesterday when I spoke in the beginning of the conference, my services have conducted online consultation on drones last year. And on security issues, 86% of about the 250 that replied to that consultation found that the scope of EASA should be extended here, and that the agency should integrate security considerations in its safety rules. In general, the respondents did not object to drones overflying city centers in safe conditions, of course. The only category of respondents that were against city centers overflights were, you can guess who was, air navigation service providers. Quite an important stakeholder in these discussions about the integration of drones into the European airspace. On liability and insurance, I just want to refer to the point I think Margot's made in the panel before this one this morning on the importance to have mandatory reporting of drones incidents. We want to bring drone operations under the normal aviation regulatory umbrella, but this includes incident reporting. An evident base of drone incidents then could feed the insurance scheme. So we need to develop a way that these incidents are reported so that we can then better adapt whatever insurance policies or schemes need to be developed and to the specificities of the sector. A final comment on environment. Well, we speak here and we have been speaking about drones and flying cities, but I'm not sure that everyone, all citizens, would like to have drones buzzing around them every day, not to speak about the sight of seeing the drones in the middle of the cities. So here too, we need to have instruments to that can use to deal with environmental issues. I think in the case of the manned aviation, EASA is certifying already aircraft not only against safety standards, but also against environmental ones. And an additional instrument from manned aviation is operating restrictions, which, for example, may limit operations during night time. So national authorities are to use instruments to protect citizens against excessive noise or impose silent areas. The first websites, I think, have already propped up where citizens can declare that their garden is a no-fly zone. So to conclude, I just wanted to again stress the point that this whole question of societal acceptance is crucial for the future of the industry and for the future of the services that drones can provide to society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My garden's largely a no-mow zone, but that's slightly different. I thought one of the interesting things I thought came out of that conversation was that both your recommendation and what's going on in Denmark, and then the conversation more generally about the need for identification. The Danish proposal is pretty close to your proposal, isn't it? There's only one microphone, I'm afraid, so we're going to have to... Oh, no, there's two. Gosh, we've had microphone inflation.
You want me to comment on that?
If you would, please, yeah.
Yes, it is. I have to say that the number plates was something I hadn't really thought of. And I don't think we discussed it. Or maybe it was one of those days when I wasn't there. But it's immediately I did say to you, well, how would we know them? I mean, if I were in my garden and a drone came across, how would I actually see them? If you have a drone that size, it fits into your hand, and up there, I mean, you need telescopes all over the place.
Oh, once you shoot it down with your shotgun, you'll be able to, yeah.
I don't shoot. But I think that's a problem. I don't know how to overcome that. And it was a question that I've raised myself after I spoke to you about it. I just don't think, I can't see it being feasible. Can you just sorry. Can you just explain what?
So, yeah, yes. Oh, Jesper. Yeah. Jesper, would you be so kind? Yeah.
Yes. We see a sequence of several years in front of us. We would like to start with drones wanting to fly in urban areas and above 250 grams. I mean, the drones we now know on the market now, and that's also why I showed you the micro drone of 16 grams. It will come down the line, but we need the technology to technology proof first and ensure that it's not too costly, because we don't want to destroy the industry. So along down the line, we also see for us an electronic ID for micro drones.
So tying that in then to the conversation we had earlier, where in effect we almost got to the point where we were saying there's, if you like, two categories of drones. There's drones which should be regulated, I'm going to struggle to use this word, but I'll use it anyway. Drones that should be regulated as toys, flying toys, and drones that should be regulated as aeroplanes, for want of a better distinction. So even the flying toys, in your view, should eventually have some sort of identification chip or something, assuming technology moves forward.
That is what we assume together with the police and the police intelligence in order to ensure the public acceptance. That is the goal.
Yeah.
And when you go below 250 grams or wherever we set the threshold, there is not much safety in it, but there is a lot of privacy. In fact, the privacy concern is increasing the smaller the drone is. So we foresee a need also for having electronic ID on the very small ones.
Even
and
on the small ones.
As a supplement, we also like them to have visual light, to be visible. Here I am, because when they're visible, they tend to be more responsible.
Interesting. I wonder if industry's got a view on whether we should be putting chips on something that only weighs 16 grams in the first place, and then a light. No comments. Oh, an array of hands, sir.
Philippe Terry, Chairman of the Trade Association RPAS in the UK. No, I don't think it's appropriate.
Sorry, did you say appropriate or practical?
Perhaps both.
Okay.
Because
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
So beyond perhaps the point you've already made, I would like to ask a couple of questions back. There are kits that you can buy. You can buy a frame separate to a motor. You can buy the flight controller separate as well. How would you implement that kind of application of there being an identity chip on that? I suggest the only particularly practical application of it would be in the commercial RPAS, because they're having to adhere to regulations already, so they're more likely to sort of accept that technology. But when you're talking about the consumer world, unless it's implemented by the manufacturers like AirDog, when it comes to kit builders, they won't do it. What about the old systems that already exist? And what about people buying second-hand ones and easily removing them? I think that's most of the...
But apart from that...
Sorry?
I said apart from that. I think they're all valid questions, aren't they? Anyone got a yeah? Jesper, what's your view on that?
Well, yes, and that's also why there are a lot of challenges, and we see it also as a ladder in the coming years. I mean, the technology, now we know that the FRID technology is extremely cheap. It has some disadvantages as well, but if that is chosen, there's no cost issue. But I mean, we have now normal CE markings on most products we buy, coffee machines or whatever. If it is a common European requirement that you have such a small chip and it costs a couple of euros, I mean, and that's perhaps not the situation now, it is the situation in some years. And I hear from industry that they actually support this very much. That's also why they do it free of charge, the testing for us, because they can see the competition from Asian drones or wherever they come from, that they can actually do better drones in the higher end segment and then be on the forefront in the competition. So if we see for us 5 years ahead, then I think it is possible.
Can I just ask another question then about it, because relating to the marking of bikes in the UK.
Bicycles.
Bicycles,
push bikes.
yes. And this was all the rage about 25, 30 years ago. And we all marched to the police station and got our bikes marked. I never heard of anyone whose bike was stolen that they ever got it back. And I don't know why they were able to probably sand the engraving off or something. But there is a limit, I think, to miniaturization, and there's also a limit on people's ability to see. I mean, I just can't see it happening. I try to expand my brain, such as it is, to encompass all these things and new technology, and there are lots of things. I can see continuous relationship between the tiny RPAS and some sort of satellite in the sky. That could do it, but who's going to complain and say, well, I'm here down in West Kent or whatever it is, and somebody's, invading my privacy? Do you think the police are going to worry about it?
Well, I personally don't, but I was the person that said who's warned the plod in the previous panel. I mean, I don't know the answer to this question. I assume from a privacy perspective, gentlemen, this would be a good thing if we could uniquely identify each RPAS.
Can I add just something quickly?
Oh, sorry. You said, yeah.
I would like to make a point that I think is about a larger picture, predominantly driven by education and the passing on the idea of responsibility, much like Emmanuel said yesterday about the adding a soul to the aircraft in a way, where back in England now, if you want to, you can, a couple of years back, you could have a couple of pints and continue driving legally. Research was done that is obviously very dangerous, so through marketing and education, now people have got to the point where they self-police themselves. So if I go down the pub and I'm driving with my friends and they say, what do you want to drink when I go to the bar? They will tell me off if I ask for a pint, even though actually you can still say have a half pint and that's legal. It's gone to the point where now people think it's completely inappropriate. So I believe we will get to the stage where, if you like, the ID chips could be a part of the solution, but not the entire one. I believe actually you'd be better off putting your effort into education.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Just on that point, before I get back then to the privacy point, the DG Grow proposal is to do exactly that, isn't it? To try to educate the population. Did I hear that correctly? The microphone. That's on.
I think that's primarily the targets when we'll be launching the awareness raising campaign will be towards the different industrial actors. But I found, for instance, the example given by our Danish colleague that as it's a consumer product, to have with the product instruction of use and a certain other information are quite interesting. I'm also responsible for firearms. When you get your permit to go hunting, there is no harmonization in the EU, so you can have a permit, but with a lot of different tests. And I think that it's on your responsibility, once you have your permit, to know exactly how you have to use, even for recreational matter, your arm. I think that for certain category of drones, we should follow exactly the same path. I would like to make another point regarding CE marking. I think that if we consider that as a consumer product, CE marking could be a good idea. But I would like to underline that behind the CE marking, we have a lot of things to evaluate and to decide upon. For instance, if the CE marking will be given through certification done by a notified body, as for instance for the kettle or for your toaster, but based on an assumption that you are following some criteria or some standards, then you can fix the CE marking, or you will need a certification of a prototype and that certify that all the drones you are marketing are exactly those comparable to those which has been certified, or for another category, should we go for a certification, a specific certification of each different drones? So the CE marking is the end of a process, but we have to decide, taking into account the specificities of the different drones, by which process you get or not the CE marking. And that's, I think, a categorization of the different drones, following certain criteria, weight, but other things, I guess, would have also to be reflected.
Thank you. So, Chris?
I would just comment that I thought the point that was made by our colleague from the industry, that there's a lot of kit out there without regulation. There are parts that you can put together to make a drone and so on. I mean, all that's fair enough, but I don't see why that stops the more respectable end of the industry going for higher standards, given the fact that you've got some public confidence to gain. I mean, you may not know that I'm a former chairman of EASA. Not your EASA, but the European Advertising Standards Alliance, because I used to, stupidly we never copyrighted the name, so you came in, Johnny come latelys in the aviation business and took the same title.
Patrick has, though, he's copyrighted.
Okay, right. Well, I used to run the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK, and this was all about reputation. That if you go for the sort of bargain basement, lowest common denominator, you can't expect to win public confidence. But if you go for higher standards, and particularly where public authorities are using the kit, you're using it, all the demonstrations we had yesterday of safety inspections and so on, that ought to be at the highest standard. If the industry simply says, well, anyone can go to Maplin and buy a bit of this and a bit of that and spy on their neighbours, well, leave the privacy side to the privacy regulators. But you've got a sector to develop, all those things about jobs and growth. I absolutely buy it. But don't just say, because there are cowboys out there, we're all going to be cowboys, or you're going to find real resistance to everything you're trying to do.
Thank you. It's a very interesting point. Yeah.
And maybe something interesting to mention that a lot of national DPAs, data protection authorities, already issued opinions on the way that privacy should be enshrined in the aviation regulation, national aviation regulation. I think the first ones to have done that is the Canadian Privacy Authority, like years ago, and they proposed the AAC, whatever it's the name of the AAC in Canada. They just proposed the AAC to integrate into the license, for example, that they just were issuing for the pilots, some privacy tests from some tests about their privacy knowledge. I just seen that in this presentation you mentioned the multiple choice test. You might consider, for example, it is an example of awareness to include into this test some question about, do you know where you have to notify your DPA when you're just processing information? You know in which case you have to get a CCTV authorization. That might be information that you might provide to the pilot in the license, just to ensure that at least those persons are aware of their obligation regarding the data protection law. And I think it's a good way to see convergent interest into the same process, to integrate privacy, regulation, liability, everything into one process. And it's very interesting to know how we will manage to do this. Yeah.
Indeed. Just in the interest of time, perhaps we better move on to another subject I'd like to canvass. Jan, I was struck in your presentation about the understanding that drone operators are going to have to be responsible for what they do. And that sort of runs then into the question of insurance, it runs into the question of liability in the event of an accident. I mean, it's self-evident at one level, but it's something we need to say, isn't it? Because if you think of them as toys, then you can think of them as playthings, whereas actually there are quite a lot of responsibilities that also run. And you spoke about that, I thought was quite a strong point.
Yeah, of course, they are responsible. We are talking now about operators, commercial of recreational, but they know. And it is a kind of awareness to the public also that you are responsible for your movement. So don't exaggerate by regulating that, because in the low level of the recreational aircraft, it's for sure you can put it in the papers, the introduction papers, in the toolkit. But when you go higher and higher on the level, then you have that identification, certification, and the examination of the people.
It comes back to the point of awareness again, doesn't it, and all of those other issues. I was also struck, if I may say, that almost the first time anyone had mentioned noise was you, Joe. I had expected people to be complaining about the environmental issues from the get-go, and I'm surprised that it sort of took till now for people to talk about noise. Can I ask the industry guys, is noise an issue? Do people complain about it? Not at all, says the man from the association. Not at all. Okay, only me, except for that man. Stand by. Yeah.
I live in the Wye Valley, an area of outstanding natural beauty. It's protected. You can't do anything without permissions. It's very quiet and idyllic. I live on a single track lane off an isolated village, and you can't hear yourself think at weekends for microlights. So these are not really a problem. The noise level is, because it's so beautiful, they're flying all the time. I don't have a clue who they are. I don't have any identification, and I don't know if they've got cameras or not. However, so we, let's keep a standard for all aviation.
Okay, certainly.
Perhaps it's my own experience. First of all, I'm a golfer, and suddenly it was the first time I has in practice, and there was a drone coming down and going away. So I missed my hole, but I'm not a Tiger Woods, so there was no problem about it.
I think you're allowed a free shot though.
But the problem is it's noise, and it's always it's already when you put it in the awareness cases for the public, that in any case in the lower level of drones, there the electricity will be over in 6, 7, 8 minutes. So when you know that, then you enjoy the drone when he's coming over.
Well, certainly that of all the issues that have been mentioned, probably the noise question is not the most pressing now, because it's a question that will come with volume. So if you have we see one drone or two, but the question is when you have plenty of them flying around, I think people may think differently. But for the moment, certainly it is not the most pressing. But the point I wanted is that we need not to lose sight of that.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you. Jesper.
Yes, it's also our assessment that noise is too early to regulate now, but bringing back the discussion to standardization, that could be an issue, to ask industry to sit down and find out how many dBs is fair to, what's the different level according, related to distances from people and so on. It's not now, but the industry can themselves prepare them, because it will be an issue when we have thousands and thousands of drones in the future. But that's the ball I would play to industry.
So a long kick downfield. Any other comments then on that side? Okay. Could I perhaps then move on to, or back to, I'm sorry to say, the issue of the liability and insurance. Now, again, Jesper, you said, I think, that you include an insurance premium in the issuing of an operator's certificate, which is almost it is self-certification, but you've got to have a permit in the way you've got to have a fishing licence or indeed a shooting licence, and that includes a small amount of insurance.
No, we are actually going for market-based solutions. We have had long negotiations with the Danish insurance sector, and they say they can come up with very affordable prices, and we have examples already, just given that we announced the regulation approximately 1 year before implementation. So what we say is that you have to write your insurance police number, bought in the market as an add-on to your family insurance, like you have an add-on with a dog insurance or skiing insurance or whatever, you can buy a supplement. And then you write the number there, and then you can put the print, and you get your permit with your insurance number in a company somewhere.
And this insurance is third party?
That's only third party. Then you can add on you can discuss who is going to take a drone landing on the roof over there. You can buy that add-on. I don't think we will require that. It will be a already today, we require insurance, third party, for professional users. We are going to expand that also for private users.
Domestic users.
That means that currently...
Can you use the microphone, please?
Give me one, thank you. That means currently you are accepting an insurance that is given without any description of what type of mission is going to be flown or where.
We are just requiring a third-party insurance according to the mission, the flying pattern they want to fly for the professional users.
Okay, you suggest to your insurance people that they go and speak with aviation insurers because I don't think that what they're doing is what is supposed to be done, and it's going to come back to haunt them.
I'm Rory Clem from EuroC. I had a meeting with 42 underwriters of Lloyd's 2 weeks ago. They have concerns which are slightly different from safety, because as you know, when you injure someone, there's obviously a big problem, but also they lose out because they have hull insurance and all sorts of other things, business liability insurances, employers liability, the whole shebang for the business area. And they're producing a report at the moment, a little brief for everybody, which should be out in about 3 weeks' time, which they'll send around to all the brokers. And please remember, brokers are salesmen, underwriters underwrite the risk, and most underwriters are underwritten in different countries by Lloyd's of London because it's reinsurance that's involved.
Reinsure. So that's an issue that we're going to need to also spend a bit of time thinking about, I think. You may have noticed that we've been joined by the Minister and indeed by some budding young artists, so we can't hold up proceedings. But simply to note that another of the things that is going to happen is that we have been working on a declaration during the course of the last couple of days. I presume a draft will be distributed soon, but to try to pick up all of the issues that we've discussed and what we think we'll have to do into the future and what the Commission will have to do as it works forward on this. So could I just perhaps ask you to join me in thanking the panel for this very interesting session and ask you to...